Meeting to order. We have meeting number 30 of the Procedure and House Affairs Committee. We have a guest today, Monsieur Mélan from Elections Canada. Great to have you here today. We have a reduced meeting today, so I'd certainly like to get right to it. I understand you have an opening statement, and if you would also introduce your guests with you today during your opening statement, and then we'll go to rounds of questions by the members. Monsieur Mélan.
Oui. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci de m'avoir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for inviting me here today. I will introduce my colleagues to you now. To my left, Mr. Stéphane Perrault, who is Senior General Counsel at Elections Canada, as well as Rémi Monard. As you're aware, there have been a significant number of media reports and much debate in recent weeks concerning various allegations of wrongdoing during the 41st general election. Most of these relate to complaints made by electors regarding different forms of improper or fraudulent telephone calls. In that context, concerns have also been raised regarding the administration of the vote in certain electoral districts. This includes allegations of unusual numbers of polling day registrations, people registering improperly, and voting by non-citizens. These are very serious matters that strike at the integrity of our democratic process. If they are not addressed and responded to, they risk undermining an essential ingredient of a healthy democracy, namely the trust that electors have in the electoral process. As Chief Electoral Officer, it is my role to ensure that every effort is made to address these issues effectively, fairly, and impartially, as well as to preserve the trust and indeed the pride that Canadians have in their electoral system. This is why I feel that it's important to be here today to explain key aspects of our administrative and investigative processes, not only for the benefit of parliamentarians, but to all Canadians. Before I do so, however, I want to address more specifically the issue that has been referred to as robocalls.
Types of alleged improper conduct involving telephone contact with electors during the 41st election. This includes complaints of both automated and live calls. In many cases, the complaints allege misrepresentation as to the source of the call, either the calls claiming to be from Elections Canada or falsely appearing to be on behalf of a particular party or candidate. In some cases, the complaints refer to electors being falsely informed of a last-minute change of polling place, whereas in other cases, the complaints relate to a harassing call, either because of the time, recurrence of the call, or because of their tone. I will come back later to the issue of change of voting location and how we inform electors of such change. Suffice it to say that automated calls informing electors of a change in their polling location during the 41st general election did not come from Elections Canada. Any action taken to deliberately misdirect electors and interfere with their right to vote under the Constitution and the Election Act is a serious offense. It not only denies the fundamental rights of affected electors, but it also diminishes our democratic institutions and the rights of all Canadians. During or immediately after the election, we received approximately 70 complaints alleging various forms of improper telephone communication, including messages impersonating Elections Canada employees and sending electors to the wrong poll location. These complaints were treated seriously and diligently by the Commissioner of Canada Election, who immediately undertook to investigate them. Significant details of the investigation are included in various court documents that were revealed by the media on February 22, 2012, and since that date. These show that on May 5, 2011, only a few days after the election, a senior investigator in Ottawa communicated with some of the complainants and met with them in Guelph on May 19. The recent media reports on detail of the subsequent investigation resulted not only in sustained media coverage, but also in a large number of people communicating with Elections Canada. Since then, close to 40,000 people have contacted my office to express their concern. Of these contacts, over 800 were complaints alleging specific occurrences of improper or fraudulent calls across the country. We have added sufficient resources to deal with the inflow of communication and to contact electors who have specific factual allegations. As I indicated in my statement of March 15, I thank Canadians for their collaboration. The Office of the Commissioner is pursuing its investigation, and I am confident in their ability to do so in a manner that meets the highest standards. Until the investigation is completed and the facts are established, I reiterate the importance of not drawing any premature conclusions. I intend to submit the report to Parliament within a year about administrative as well as legislative issues around privacy and communication with electors in the context of evolving technologies. The report will examine not only issues around telephone communication, but also, for example, the increasing use of social media and the new challenges they pose. In the meantime, I believe it is important that I share with parliamentarians as well as with Canadians certain information regarding our administrative and investigative processes. This will help clarify the role and responsibility of my office, as well as those of all participants in maintaining trust in our electoral process. L'administration d'un scrutin est une...
The administration of an electoral event is a massive and complex undertaking. For the purposes of this appearance, it can simply be broken down into 3 key activities for which my office is exclusively responsible and accountable. These are identifying and locating electors. During the last general election, we had nearly 24 million electors. Setting up polls, secondly. And once again, during the last election, we had over 70,000 offices, voting offices, or polling places, rather, over 2,400, and administrating the vote as well. The identification of electors is done by maintaining the National Register of Electors and updating it through revisions during the election. We do everything possible to ensure that electors are correctly listed at their place of residence. The second aspect of the process is setting up the polls and informing electors of their polling place. This is done locally by returning officers and their staff during the election, in accordance with guidelines provided by my office. Poll locations are confirmed early in the election calendar so that electors can be informed of where to vote on the voter information card that is mailed to each registered elector 24 days before polling day. Subsequent changes in poll locations are relatively rare, but inevitably do occur for a variety of reasons. In the last general election, a total of 473 polls, or less than 1%, were moved, affecting some 300,000 electors, or, once again, barely 1.3%. This can be in response to feedback from electors or candidates, or because of an unforeseen event such as a flood or power outage resulting in the loss of a polling place. If a change of voting location occurs in the last week of the campaign, it is too late to issue a revised voter information card. In the last election, there were late changes to 61 polls in 24 ridings, affecting 19,000 electors out of 24 million. We do not have the electors' telephone numbers and do not call them to notify them of late polling place changes. In those cases, we ensure that a poll worker is present at the closed poll to redirect voters to the new polling place. The responsibility of communicating with electors with respect to their polling place is exclusively that of Elections Canada. We have the most authoritative and up-to-date information on the electors and their voting locations, and we are accountable for it. This is why we specifically ask political parties and candidates not to communicate with electors in this regard, but refer them to Elections Canada in order to avoid errors and confusion among electors.
Component of the electoral process for which Elections Canada is responsible in the administration of the vote. In this regard, recent media reports have suggested possible irregularities in certain electoral districts. The administration of the votes involve the application of the voter identification rules, the handling of the ballots, and the counting of the votes. While Elections Canada is responsible for conducting the vote, candidates also play an important role. Among other things, they may appoint representatives or scrutineers at each poll to observe the vote, challenge the qualification of electors where appropriate, and report any irregularities. As in the case with poll location, it is important that each participant understand his or her own role. Scrutineers who have reasonable doubts regarding the citizenship of a person may ask that the person take the prescribed oath. They cannot, however, otherwise attempt to prevent electors from voting or interfering with the application of the voter identification rules. It should be noted that if there are reasons or information supporting a concern that persons who voted are not qualified electors, information must be provided to my office or to the Commissioners of Canada Election. This must be done in a timely fashion and with specific factual elements. Sorry. I find it troubling to hear sometimes sweeping and vague allegations of irregularities being made public many months after the election and not supported by specific facts. In some cases, the complaints are made to the media without an information being forwarded to Elections Canada. Such allegations cannot be verified and merely undermine the trust of Canadians. For example, there has been recent media coverage on allegations of large number of unqualified electors voting in Scarborough Rouge River and improper voter registration in Eglinton Lawrence during the May 2011 election. No specific actionable information has been provided to us, making any kind of review challenging, to say the least. Regardless, in Eglinton Lawrence, we were able to determine that the forms shown in the media were in fact copies of applications to register and vote by local special ballot and not polling day registration forms. To be diligent, we examined all the 1,275 of these forms, and with the exception of 3 voters who were listed at a commercial address, could not find any evidence of irregularities as claimed. The 3 cases that we've identified are being looked into as we speak. I will move now to the process of conducting investigation. The Commissioner of Canada's election has the responsibility under the Canada Elections Act for the investigation and enforcement of election offences. He is appointed by me and is accountable to me, but as independent authority under the law. The Commissioner is supported by a core team of 9 investigators and is assisted by lawyers and others within the Elections Canada. Under the Act, all the expenses required to pursue his investigation and carry out his duties may be drawn on the Consolidated Revenue Fund. This can include contracting for additional resources as required. The Commissioner's Office receives complaints from the public as well as internal referrals from Elections Canada. The Commissioner's Office carefully and impartially reviews all complaints it receives concerning an offence under the Act. This review considers whether the complaint or referral first falls within the Commissioner's jurisdiction, whether the information provided is sufficient, and whether there is a basis for an investigation. If the complaint is anonymous, or if the allegations are too vague, there may be no basis to pursue an investigation. If a file is closed, the complainant is notified of reasons in writing. Comme tous les organismes d'enquête, le bureau du commissaire.
Like all law enforcement bodies, the Office of the Commissioner treats complaints and referrals in the strictest confidence. It discloses neither the sources of the information nor the information collected, except as necessary for enforcement purposes, for example, as part of court documents. Preserving the confidentiality of the investigations is critical to effectiveness, as well as to fairness. It serves to protect the privacy of individuals and the presumption of innocence. In so doing, it also prevents incomplete or inaccurate information from serving partisan purposes and undermining confidence in the fairness of the electoral process. Following an investigation, the Commissioner may refer a matter for prosecution to the Director of Public Prosecutions, who decides whether charges should be laid. The Commissioner may alternatively enter into a compliance agreement in which the person recognizes having contravened the Act. It may be accompanied by conditions that the Commissioner considers necessary to ensure compliance with the Act. And these agreements are published in the Canada Gazette and on our website. Where the public interest does not warrant formal enforcement, the Commissioner may also issue a caution letter.
Mechanism in the Canada Elections Act can and should be improved. The Act relies almost exclusively on offenses and fines and jail terms that are not tailored to regulatory issues. On one hand, regulatory matters that could be addressed more effectively with administrative measures and penalties are subject to the delays and costs associated with criminal investigation and prosecutions. On the other hand, serious offenses carry disproportionately light penalties, including maximum fines that are very low, usually $2,000 or $5,000. It is therefore my intention to carry out an overall review of the compliance and enforcement mechanism in the Act and to submit a report to Parliament before the next general election. This will be in addition to my report on the more specific issue of robocalls. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I think we can say that Canadians are proud of their electoral system and that they should be. However, recent events and media reports have shaken their confidence. And as I indicated at the outset, the trust of electors in the integrity of the electoral process is an essential aspect of a healthy democracy. Election Canada performs a key function in this regard. When irregularities or improper conducts are brought to our attention, we have a responsibility to take action. We must look into them diligently, and we do. If the regime is inadequate and needs to be improved, it is my role to make those changes or to recommend legislative amendments. We all have a role in preserving trust in our electoral process. This includes not only Elections Canada, but electors themselves, the candidates, the parties, and also the media. The quality of our democracy depends on the vigilance and the conduct of all players involved. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mélan. We'll start with a 7-minute round. I believe, Mr. Lukiski, are you first?
Yes, I am.
All right.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Monsieur Mélan, for appearing here today. Let me just try and confirm something right off the top. I take it from your statement that you are confident that both your office and the Office of the Commissioner of Elections have sufficient resources to deal with the complaints that come forward on this whole issue of voter suppression?
Yes.
Is that correct? Let me then also try and clarify. You mentioned in your report that during and immediately after the election there was about 70 complaints about misleading phone calls, that type of thing, but subsequent to all of the media attention, there's been about 800 complainants about actual phone calls or representation that might have been misleading.
Allegations regarding phone calls.
So the 40,000 were mainly generated by advocacy and activist groups, and they were just contacts, not complaints. So 800 is the number we're dealing with? Roughly? 800
is the number of specific complaints
Okay.
with specific allegations, 40,000 or so contacts of Canadians expressing concerns about the matter.
Thank you very much. I think there's been some misinterpretation, either deliberately or by honest confusion as to how many complaints there actually were. So I just wanted to verify that 800 is the number we're dealing with here. Let me turn now to what you'd mentioned in your report about the role of Elections Canada in providing correct information to political parties and candidates. So you mentioned that, I believe in your last report, actually you mentioned that about 84% of all addresses of eligible voters were correct?
That's the standard quality measure that applies to the list at any given day. It's better on election day.
Which would mean then, by extension, that about 16% of the electors on that list had incorrect addresses. Would that be?
Not on election day. So I just want to be clear for that. The 84% refers that if you take a picture of the list at any given day, It's at around 84%. During the election campaign, as you all know, we do extensive revision activities to bring that up to date. Make sure, again, that all electors are shown against their residential address.
What would
And during the election, the last election, my recollection is that there were over 700,000 such adjustments that were made during the revision period.
Help me with the math, then. What percentage, if it's not 16% of the voters on the voters list had incorrect addresses, if you adjusted 700,000, that means what, about 12, 13%, 14% had incorrect addresses?
Or so.
So that is about 2.5 to 3 million incorrect addresses. Is that correct?
Yeah, roughly.
Which would mean roughly, on average, about 10,000 incorrect addresses per riding.
I guess we
Okay. Again, rough math. I guess the point I'm making is that all political parties, all candidates use the voters list in terms of voter contact, to try and contact voters, to persuade them to vote for their candidate or respective party, so that if they are getting incorrect information from Elections Canada, then it stands to reason that some of the information they're providing back to those voters may also be incorrect. So I guess my question would be, what plans do you have to try and increase the accuracy of the voters list itself before the next election?
I think, in fact, if the information is incorrect, the party would not be able to reach those electors based on that incorrect information. So, in terms of improving the register, again, I should point out that the figures, the quality measures for the register compares favorably with other jurisdictions where registration is mandatory. So again, I just want to remind everyone that registration is not mandatory in Canada, at least between elections. And I think the safety valve at the end of the day is that electors can, on election day, attend polling station and register for voting on that day. In terms of improving the measures, the quality of the register, we're taking various initiatives on an ongoing basis to see how we can better reflect the correct address of electors.
Thank you for that. I would just point out that I have to challenge you a little bit on the fact that you said if they had an incorrect address, a candidate wouldn't be able to contact the voter. Not quite true. I mean, we contact by phone, and we could certainly track down a voter, but the address is something that...
We don't have phone numbers, so those phone numbers are not coming from Elections Canada.
I think most candidates and campaign offices are able to find those phone numbers on their own.
I think it's an important aspect of it. I recognize that fully. No.
I also
think
understand...
there's always issues when you try to integrate data from different sources.
Thank you very much, Chairman Howe.
You have 2 minutes left, sir.
Quickly, I just want to deal with, since your report basically is saying that the final investigation won't be concluded for some time, and you won't be able to report on your findings for some time. The one thing that we do know, in terms of a misleading call, did happen in Guelph. And that was with the Liberal candidate, Mr. Valeriat, who has already reported that his campaign made some misleading phone calls to voters using a fake name of a woman who purported to be a Laurie MacDonald, who was not, using a fake address, fake phone number, and didn't identify themselves as a representative of Mr. Valeriat's campaign. Now, Mr. Valeriat has made public comments saying that he had contacted your office, and in effect, you signed off on the phone call saying that there was really nothing unacceptable about them. To me, that seems very strange. Can you confirm whether or not you had given Mr. Valeriat a sign that those phone calls were acceptable? Because he certainly indicated publicly that he said he got that information from your office.
We don't, and the Elections Act does not really regulate the content of messages, and we certainly don't pre-approve messages by political parties.
But pre-approval, Mr. Valeriat said apparently he contacted your office after admitting that they'd made this misleading phone calls, asked whether or not they were acceptable under elections law, and you said that they were.
I'm not aware that there's been any ruling on this matter. Again, as you so publicly known, there's been 2 complaints lodged on this matter with the commissioner, and the commissioner is looking.
Is it,
into
in
that.
your opinion, then, against elections law to make a phone call of that sort without identifying that you're representing a particular candidate?
That's an interesting aspect. Again, the Elections Act does not cover such things, these matter as such. Elections Act deals with advertising, deals with expenses, and requires that any advertising be linked to a tagline reflecting that it's been authorized by the official agents of the candidate. Now, the question that will arise is whether a phone message such as the one that you described constitutes advertising under the Elections Act, and if it does, it would necessarily mean that a tagline should be attached. But again, that's why I want to come back to the committee later on, because the Act is far from clear on these matters.
So,
I'm going to have to stop you there. Mr. Christofferson, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Mayran, for your attendance today. Let me say at the outset that we've had a couple of experiences where agents of Parliament have not lived up to the standard that we had hoped. I just want to commend you for your role as an agent of Parliament in reaching out and asking the committee and asking Parliament if you could come forward on an issue that was clearly in the public domain, very controversial, and the fact that you offered to come here and said, I need to give an update to Parliament to let them know what's going on, give them an opportunity to ask me any questions. I just want to compliment you on your public duty in doing that. And to me, that is the kind of performance that we like to see from our agents of Parliament, and thank you for that. I know you're very limited as to what you can say, and so it limits what we can ask, if you will. But I'll ask anyway, and accept the fact that you're going to say to me, I can only tell you what time it is. But my question would be this. There's a little more information in the public domain about Guelph than there is than any other particular location. Can you give us a sense of whether or not you see any linkages? Is this the same file to you? Are they separate files? Are the issues similar? Can you speak to that at all, Mr. Mayran?
As I pointed out in my presentation, more information is available around the Guelph matter because of court documents that are public. From the point of view of the commissioners or from Elections Canada, we're looking at all the complaints that are sent to us, and we assess each of those complaints on their own merit.
Okay. I think I've just run into the very issue that I predicted I was going to run into, and I accept that as a limitation of where we are. Let me ask, in terms of the 700, I believe is the number, 800, sorry. Is that, how high, or how does that number compare to other elections?
Well, that's only part of the complaints we got in relation to the 41st GE. I submitted a report to Parliament earlier on pointing out the number of complaints we have received in total. I don't have the exact number in mind right now, but it's in my report at the time. The other thing I would caution is that a single incident, I remember in the last GE, an interview that was done with a well-known candidate on polling day generated 700 complaints on itself. And again, we ruled that there was no irregularities there. So I think we have to be careful about those numbers.
Again, could you speak to us about the threshold that you would need to pass in order to declare or go to the courts or recommend, whatever the process is, a new election, a by-election, the threshold for charges? And is there any circumstance in which a general election in total can be declared null and void? I mean, it's extreme, but I'm asking the question, what are the circumstances? And I guess the question would be, are any of the issues that we're dealing with anything remotely as serious as that at this point in your investigation?
Well, the threshold for investigation, I understand maybe three parts to your question. In terms of investigation, I must stress these are penal investigations, so they have to meet the standards of criminal law. in terms of fairness, due process, various fundamental rights that are provided by the Charter, and of course the burden of evidence, which is beyond reasonable doubt. In terms of challenging election results, this is a matter for the court, and any elector can bring a matter before the court to ask for the annulment or contest the result of an election, as long as it is within 30 days that of the facts that the elector became aware of the facts or the reasons for disputing the election. And the elector has to prove, determine, or show that the results were affected by the circumstances that are brought before the courts.
Okay, thank you. Can you give us an indication of whether or not there are other ridings besides Guelph specifically that you're looking at that you can mention today?
I can tell you that the 800 complaints or so cuts across pretty much the whole country. So if you ask me, it's 10 provinces and 1 territory.
And the complaints are similar in nature, sir?
Specific allegation regarding various type of phone calls.
Given that circumstance, how likely is it that it's one rogue person who would be behind this? I ask it.
I think that would be speculative. I think the commissioner has to carry his investigation and determine all the facts.
Okay. Do you have all the tools that you need? I know you have the financial resources because you can draw upon the Consolidated Revenue Fund, which gives you basically unlimited resources. What about legislative tools for these specific investigations? Do you have all the tools that you need?
Well, again, as I said, these are penal investigations. It's so the commissioner can draw on the various tools that exist in the criminal code. For instance, some of the things that have been reported are around ITOs, which is a procedure provided in the criminal code to secure information. I will, in due course, come back with reports suggesting maybe some areas where tools can be improved.
You do have a sense that there's some improvement that could be done, and you'll come back to us with those recommendations, as you have in the past with others that hopefully we're going to make some gains on. Do you currently have the power to compel witnesses to appear before you, to put them under oath? Can you give them any kind of immunity? When you're dealing with witnesses in your investigation, what are the extent of your powers?
Power to compel either individual to appear or to produce document that requires, for documents it requires a court order. And again, the commissioner and the investigator have the same authority as investigators under the criminal code. No more, no less.
I'll do it? Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, sir.
Monsieur Garneau, 7 minutes for you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour, Monsieur Méran. Merci de votre
Thank you, Mr. Méran. Thank you for your participation here and for having appeared here, all the witnesses. You mentioned that there were about 800 complaints amongst all the contacts that you received. You mentioned that it went across all 10 provinces. Could you please give us the number of ridings that are covered by those 800 complaints? Well, I think roughly 200 ridings. Amongst those 800 complaints? Yes. Yes, they're distributed across the country.
complaints. How is that funneled down into individual cases that have been brought before the Elections Commissioner? I'm sure some of them deal with the same potential offense. How is that worked down into a number of specific files, if you like, that are going to be or are being investigated by Elections Canada?
Well, that's really a matter for the Commissioner. I'm not sure I understand fully the question. We've put additional resources to deal with the intake of all the complaints and contacts that we're receiving. There's a preliminary triage taking place. As you could have read in the newspaper, many of those complainants have already been contacted by personnel from the Commissioner's office, and it's following its course.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned in your introductory remarks that you would be submitting a report within a year. I just want to be 100% clear that that's within a year of today, or is it within a year of the last election?
Not the year of the last election. I can assure you that. It's within a year or as soon as possible.
As soon as possible. Okay. As you know, there are court challenges involving 8 ridings at the moment, 7 of them from the Council of Canadians and 1 in the Etobicoke Centre. And as you pointed out, an elector is free to go in front of a court and to challenge the result of an election and on the grounds that it was not done properly and ask that it be overturned. That process, does that process go forward regardless of, does it have to wait till your report comes out a year from now, or is that an independent process?
It's totally independent. The electors that are bringing those proceedings will have to present their own evidence.
And similarly, if there are other court challenges that arise in the days to come, they can go forward in that same fashion. Okay. In the media, of course, we've heard about the fact that the famous Monsieur Poutine, that there was a transaction through PayPal, and that PayPal had provided a copy of that transaction, and that also Rack 9, through which the calls went, an IP address had been provided. Is that information going to allow the Elections Commissioner to identify Monsieur Poutine?
I will not comment on the investigation. Again, this information has been publicized by the media after taking notice of documents that have been presented in court. I can only say that the investigation is following its course.
Okay. I have to admit I'm curious to know whether the IP address came from an internet cafe and the credit card was a disposable credit card, or... Yes, but at this point you're not free to share that information with us. With respect to the court challenge that have come forward, at what point would Elections Canada become involved? Does this await the ruling of a judge before anything happens, or does Elections Canada, are they brought in to check on whether the process was, whether there's any validity to the complaint?
We've been served yesterday with the proceedings there, so our counsels are looking into that. Again, that's very much, on those matters, we act very much as amicus curiae, so we assist the court in its hearing of the matters, and will provide information that the court will find necessary to conduct the hearing.
And my final question is, are you able to share with us how many actual investigations, specific discrete investigations, are underway within the office of the Elections Commissioner? We all know about Guelph, of course, and we've heard about Thunder Bay and things like that, but do you know how many are?
The only thing I can say for our purpose today is that there is roughly 250 files open in the Commissioner's office. I would caution, however, to draw too much in those things. Many complaints may be combined in a single file, or maybe combined in a single investigation.
Which was really what I was getting at in one of my earlier questions. You mentioned that you have all the resources necessary, or that are available. I have a question of interest here. Some of these investigations require people with expertise in doing investigations. Is that a limiting factor here, or has the Elections Commissioner been able to identify the right people with the right experience to do this kind of investigation? It's obviously a specialized task.
Confident that the Commissioner has the required expertise, the qualified and very experienced investigators to look into these matters. Where there is, as for any investigation, where there are need for special knowledge, you can contract resources and acquire that knowledge.
Again, one last question. You mentioned that there is potentially as many as 200 ridings and that there's 250 files. If anybody in those ridings feels that, yes, there definitely was something that should not have happened, are they free to go forward and, as individual electors, go to a court and challenge the result, or do they have to wait for your report?
No, that's the mechanism. It's totally separate from my office and the Commissioner's office. That's a remedy that's available to all electors in accordance with the Elections Act.
Ils sont pas obligés d'attendre.
No.
So they don't have to wait? No. Thank you, Mr. Méran.
Minute round, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mera, thank you for being here today. I appreciate your comments. I'm a new member of Parliament, and I've just gone through an election. You've now kind of boiled this down to 800 complaints you're investigating. When we receive information from Elections Canada in New Brunswick Southwest, it's 50 to 60,000 voters, say, on average in New Brunswick, roughly. But yet mistakes do happen. Can you just kind of maybe talk about that briefly? For example, is it possible that in Southwest, and I recognize you are constantly updating your data between the start of the election and voting day, and you nail it near the end. But of course, we're using the data that's provided from your office initially. Can names get put in, say, Southwest, inadvertently, a name or two from another riding in a neighboring riding, another province? Does that happen? Do mistakes like that ever happen?
Errors could happen. It's not an error-free system, and you can imagine with 24 million electors, yes, there will be some errors from time to time, but there are mechanisms to identify them and correct them. I would point out that candidates play a key role there in terms of they see errors in the list that they should bring it to our attention.
But it's and I agree, and I saw a lot of the work that's done by volunteers that are provided by the parties. But if the campaigns themselves, the local campaigns, are taking the data provided from Elections Canada, loading it into our computers, matching those names with phone numbers, and then working off that, either communicating with live calls or auto dials or mail. In Southwest, for example, it's conceivable I could have contacted a number of voters, particularly in the early days of the campaign, that didn't have the right to vote for me. Is that a possibility?
It's always a possibility. I don't know, again, how the various databases are working and how well they're working together.
Yeah. No, fair enough. What's my time? About a minute and a half, Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, because that's in a campaign we're moving quickly as well, trying to correct data. We see errors, and I know we send it back to your office. Both that happens officially through Elections Canada offices that are set up in the ridings, and as well from our campaigns working together. But at the same time, we're still campaigning. We're still sending out literature, making calls, identifying voters, contacting them, and urging them to get out to vote. So 800 to me strikes me as potentially just a few errors per riding in the grand scheme in the grand scheme of the number of potential voters. What's your sense of the number? If you were to look at this 800, do you think it's again,
without speculating too much, maybe 2 points I would make is we know in the case of Pierre Poutine that there were at least 6,700 calls placed. Again, if I look at the complaints received, there's quite a gap there. The other thing, yes, there could be errors, and very legitimate and good faith errors. What is troubling here is that there were definitely calls that were placed on behalf of people, falsely placed on behalf of people, including Elections Canada. So,
sure, yeah. Well,
error or not in the addressing or the phone numbers.
And I'm not trying to discount those isolated incidents exactly. I guess my last question is, it's been kind of put on the table a little bit. Do you still stand by the certification of the election results in the ridings across the country, or where?
Absolutely, unless court determines otherwise. Yes, I've certified those writs when they were returned, and I stand by those certifications as we speak.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson. Mr. Toon, for 4 minutes.
Thank you. Puis merci d'avoir venu. C'est vraiment très.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for having come to testify with us. It's most interesting. The scope of this investigation is extraordinary. And I think, first of all, have there been other recent investigations of this scope? We're talking about 250, 800 well-founded complaints, 40,000 Canadians calling in with concerns. Is this something you've ever seen before? Well, let's say it's unusual. Okay. What is the distinction between a well-founded complaint and 40,000 Canadians expressing concern? Well, 40,000 contacts, as we've called them, these are people who have contacted Elections Canada to share their concerns about the situation. So very often they will ask that the act be rectified. Some will ask us to ensure. Well, we receive all kinds of requests and suggestions. When you talk about 800 complaints, you're talking about specific allegations with respect to calls received by electors. Out of those well-founded complaints, those 800 complaints, if there were criminal charges laid, I know that you have to meet the burden of reasonable proof, reasonable doubt and all that, but does this mean that you believe that the 800 complaints are well-founded? Look, we just said that they were 800, that they were well-founded complaints that have been received and investigated according to the circumstances. For there to be criminal repercussions, then yes, they would have to prove the allegations beyond any reasonable doubt. Thank you. So if it is a well-founded complaint, well, if it's a complaint, it has to be based on certain criteria, right? Do we have those criteria? Well, these are infractions that are described in the legislation, and that includes interfering with an elector's right to vote. And so what would the evidence be? So we often talk about calls. So what makes it, what is it that makes you retain a complaint? What is it that makes you decide to review a complaint or to investigate a complaint? Well, we did receive a few affidavits. I saw some of them, but it's all part of the investigation. It's up to the Commissioner to ensure that he has all the necessary facts to be able to reach a conclusion as to the assessment of this complaint as being well-founded. If he is satisfied that it is, then he has to say so to the Director of Criminal Investigations, who will then decide if there is grounds for, if there are grounds for criminal prosecution. And did you receive any written submissions from political parties? Have you seized any documents from political parties? No, I haven't seized any documents from parties, from any party to my knowledge, but that would be up to the Commissioner in any case. So you hand that on to the Commissioner. Yes. Only the Commissioner can request documents, can seize documents. And to your knowledge, did he do so? Well, as we saw in the various media stories, yes. We did receive information from third parties, and I would like to say that court orders do not mean that people who are providing the information are being investigated. That's a very important nuance to understand. These are third parties who possess information which may be relevant to the investigation. It has nothing to do with the fact that that party may or may not be under investigation. In fact, often it's the opposite. So did you receive affidavits? Well, I know that we've received letters and various pieces of information that were received. And is anyone under investigation?
Mr. Albrecht, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Miron, and your colleagues for being with us today. In your report of the 41st general election, in the very first couple pages of that, you state, "I can say with confidence that the election proceeded smoothly and that Canadians were presented with an accessible electoral framework they could trust and use." And today, at the conclusion of your remarks, you say, we all have a role in preserving trust in our electoral process. This includes not only Elections Canada, but the electors themselves, the candidates and political parties, and also the media. I'm confident that every person around this table is concerned about protecting the integrity of our electoral system. And I can say with confidence that every person around this table, including this side, is very hopeful and reassured to hear your comments today that Elections Canada does, in fact, have the resources to complete this investigation. I just need to point out that, and I know that all of us around this table know this already, but during the writ period, every candidate goes door to door, knocking on doors, making phone calls, identifying voters. If that contact is made early in the campaign, it's quite possible that someone will indicate overwhelming support on day 2 or 3 of the campaign, and by week 5 of the campaign, they may have changed their mind. But that person has been identified as one of my supporters. My office will contact that person on Elections Day, asking them, please get out to vote. Now, in the event that they've changed their mind in that time, it's possible they could perceive that to be harassment. I think it's important that the Canadian public understands that all candidates, at least most candidates, try to get door-to-door, phone as many supporters as possible, and that there will be mistakes made, honest mistakes, in contacting voters who may say at the end, well, we weren't even supporting that candidate, now he's harassing me. I think on balance, the number of complaints that we're dealing with here, you indicated it again today, is 800 complaints. And when you indicated earlier that there are 70,000 polling stations, am I correct in that? Roughly 70,000 polling stations. That's literally less than roughly one complaint per 100 polling stations. Now, I'm not trying to minimize the level of complaints. Every single complaint is important. Every single complaint is important, and we want every one of those complaints to be investigated. But my question for Elections Canada is, what is the process? When you receive that complaint, how does Elections Canada follow up? Have each of those complainants been contacted as to what is being done? And at the end, is there a response that they receive that's in writing? Or how do you close the loop, if I can use that term, in terms of those complaints that have been lodged?
Very, very quickly. Each and every complaint is acknowledged. So there's an acknowledgement sent to the complainants. And at the end of the process, the complainant would be advised of the result. If there was an investigation or whatever took place, will be advised of the outcome. So there's a minimum of 2 contacts.
I'm sorry?
There's a minimum of 2 contacts with plaintiff.
Through the process of investigation of the complaint.
Sometimes it may be more if there is an actual investigation taking place. Again, I think we have to be careful. Complaint does not equate investigation. So I just want to make that distinction once again. Each and every complaint is acknowledged by Elections Canada, depending on the point of entry in Elections Canada, and it is responded to following whatever review process. Could be administrative. In some cases, it may warrant a referral to the commissioner, and then it will take its course.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Lakiski.
Thanks very much. Thank you once again, Monsieur Miron. Just want to get back, if I can, to the complaints versus contacts, because you'd mentioned there was roughly 40,000 contacts. I suspect most of them, or many of them at least, came from form letters, email-generated form letters from groups like Lead Now and the like. But if there's only 800, not trying to minimize it, I concur with my colleague, but if we're looking at 800 complaints, reasonably founded complaints over roughly 200 ridings, that would mean, obviously the average would be about 4 per, but it could mean that one riding had as little as 1 complaint lodged, as many as 7 complaints in another riding. But based on the election return, which you've said you know the validity of the election in your mind is still there. You signed the writs of election to all of these candidates who were elected. since there's a court challenge in 7 ridings, and we're only talking about perhaps an average of 4 complaints, in other words, perhaps as little as 4 examples, even if they were verified, of a voter receiving a vote suppression or misleading phone call trying to get them to another voting station or to try and prevent them from voting in itself. What is the level that is required, going back to what David was saying, to overturn a result? It wouldn't seem to me that if we're talking only about 4 complaints, even if they were legitimate, per riding, that would be enough to overturn an election result. Have you got an opinion on what it would take to actually have you look at, even consider the possibility of overturning an election result?
The responsibility to overturn the election lays with the court, and the court will decide whether.
But your opinion?
My understanding of the legislation is that there has to be a demonstration that the result of the specific election, riding election, were affected by the irregularities claimed by the plaintiff.
This is the hypothetical, but based again on the information that you have, if a court, since there is a court action now occurring within 7 ridings, would you be defending the election results if a court challenge was actually gone to the route where a court said, well, I think that there may be evidence here? What would your position be as Elections Canada?
Will be to act as amicus curiae and provide all the information that the court may need from us in terms of assessing whether an election should stand or not.
Would you offer an opinion?
No.
So when you're saying right now that you validated all
that opinion has to be the one of the court.
I understand the decision has to be one of the court. Mm-hmm. But being the chief electoral officer of Canada, I would suspect that courts would want to hear an opinion based on why did you validate the results and based on the evidence given if you thought that they were sufficient to overturn the results that you had already validated.
I would advise the court on to use the information they have to determine if the court believes that the results have been affected given the evidence that was presented to the court. That's the test that the court has to use.
So the corollary to that is
the court to make that determination.
Yeah, thank you. Then the assumption then is that, and I assume this is factual, Elections Canada has never in the past and would never in the future recommend an election result be overturned?
That's not our role under the statute. If it's a role that parliamentarian wants to give to Elections Canada, we can discuss that.
Finally, have you any sense, unfair question, but as David said, I'll ask it anyway. Have you any sense whatsoever how long the Commissioner of Elections might be in his current investigation?
I think it would be highly speculative to anticipate the timing of these matters. The Commissioner has been at it since May 5th, as I mentioned earlier. And I think you have a good sense of what's been happening since May 5th. And you also probably understand some of the challenges the Commissioner is still facing in bringing this matter to full light.
Thank you. I have Mr. Camartin. 4 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci, Mr. Méran d'être ici.
Thank you, Mr. Méran, for having come today.
In the beginning, one of the complaints you got was from my wife and another supporter, and I know you did because you, Mr. Matthews, used it in the affidavit in Edmonton to get that material from RAC 9. We've never heard from you. We've never heard from the Commissioner. We never heard from Mr. Matthews. The first time I knew that you had done anything with the information we gave you, which was the phone number that eventually led you to, at least as far as we've got, to Piat Putin, for one of those 2 calls that we received in my writing. So I was quite surprised, quite frankly, when you gave the answer to Mr. Albrecht that every one of the complaints has been contacted. I can assure you my wife has never been contacted, nor has the other volunteer been contacted.
Acknowledge, I didn't say contact.
We've heard nothing.
In the sense that complaints were acknowledged. Now,
but you said in some written form?
In the form that we normally are contacted with, so it could be email, it could be letter, it could be a phone call, it could be various...
Neither my wife nor the other person was contacted at all, or acknowledged there was nothing. first we heard about it was when the information came out in the press that the phone number that we had given had been used. With regards to the court action that's outstanding, I guess the 8 of them, you're named as the Chief Electoral Officer. The Attorney General is named. In past practices, who has defended these? You obviously do not. I understand your role is more of a, if I can say, a resource to the court. Is the Attorney General responsible for defending these? What's been the past practice?
Rarely have I seen, and I should point out, it's rare that elections are contested in such matter. I'm not aware that the Attorney General has taken active part, depending what are the issues that are being raised, but I'm not aware that they've taken an active part in that in such proceedings.
Have you any indication?
And I should point out that whatever is the role of the Attorney General is completely independent and separate from the role and the position that Elections Canada could take on any issue.
You've had no indication from the Attorney General how they're going to respond to these court actions?
I don't think so, not yet.
Monsieur Perreault?
I'm only aware that they've been served, and we have not had any discussions with the Attorney General's office.
Mr. Méran, the whole attempt on the part of the Conservatives to diminish the number of calls and the significance in the lawsuit, there's pleadings that the number of calls that have come in can be scientifically measured as to how many you didn't hear from and how many calls, in fact, were made. Have you looked at that material, or have you ever seen a study like that?
Not in detail. I've read about these things, but again, that's not. Again, that's something that, if it's relevant to the investigation, sure would be considered with the Commissioner, but I'm not sure how it would be. As I mentioned earlier, we know, again from court documents, that 6,700 calls were placed under that famous 450 number. And again, we got 70 complaints, a little bit less than that from the Guelph riding. So we know that many people don't complain, obviously.
Okay, but if you're asked for that kind of information by the courts, or you're not in a position to be able to give it, you don't have any, you haven't done that kind of study yourself. Elections Canada hasn't done that kind of study itself.
No, correct.
With regards to the Commissioner,
Sorry, Joe.
That can't have been 4 minutes.
4 minutes and 14 seconds, to tell you the truth. Mr. Zimmer, 4 minutes.
Sir, thank you again for coming today. I think 30 million Canadians would agree that putting on a general election is one difficult task, to say the least. And we heard, 70,000 polling stations. Certainly is admirable, and that errors will be made regardless of how good of an effort is made, and any error is really one too many. And I guess I just would like to talk about something specifically. We're hearing about deliberate acts that are attempting to dissuade voters from voting or sending them to the wrong polling stations. I would suggest moving, though, to more of the non-deliberate acts. And I think we mentioned earlier that there was 84% in terms of accurate calling lists or voters lists. But that still remains that there's 16% that there's still in error. And I guess most of us, and me, I was alarmed to see that number. And you had said that 700,000 were updated, but that still leaves 3.1 million in error. And I guess just for Canadians' confidence, and I know that's why you're here, can you relay your confidence in the system with that high of amount of error? Can you give Canadians a sense of confidence that we still have a good system? And I'll go back, to your numbers of 4 per riding in terms of calls, of complaints, of actual calls. So we see quite a discrepancy in numbers there of a significant amount of errors, 3.1 million as opposed to 4 per riding in terms of net complaints. So there's quite a gap there, like you had stated. How can Canadians still be confident in the Elections Canada system?
I think Canada's system is recognized worldwide as one of the better, if not the best system that exists, especially in terms of registration of electors. Countries all over the world are coming to us to see how we manage the list of electors, and it is a model around the world. Not sure. Again, we have to be careful with numbers here. I would point out that a single elector being misdirected from his poll is a serious offense. That's at the end of the day, and that's what investigations are about. In terms of impact on system, how the system can be improved, yes, I think I made a regular report to Parliament to suggest some improvement to the system, and I will continue to do that. But I think we have to be careful not to mix the two.
Right, and I guess I would...
I'm not suggesting you are, but...
Yeah, no, I would completely agree with you. I think when you said one is one too many, we'd absolutely agree if it's done deliberately, or even really non-deliberately. If it's an accident, that still is unacceptable. But I guess what I'm trying to get from you, and you've stated it, that we can still have a high degree of confidence that our electoral system in Canada is amongst the best in the world.
Yes, and we'll make sure it remains so.
Right.
Absolutely. And again, in terms of error, the one thing I can assure every Canadian and the committee is that calls made on behalf of Elections Canada are not errors. I'm sorry. This is not an error. That's a deliberate attempt.
Yeah, and I agree with
for
you.
the right of an elector.
And that's I would agree with you there. But I guess what I'm referring to is that if ridings are given incorrect data, and we're responding to that data, and the Canadians are responding to that data and going to the wrong polling stations as a result of incorrect data, that simply put, that's, again, if there's one too many. But I think most of all parties would agree that if it's a deliberate act, we'd absolutely want to get to the bottom of that, and we do. So that's not what I'm saying. But I guess what I would ask you...
I know you would ask. Your time is up on that ask, and I have Mr. Hahn next on the list, but I know Mr. Lukitsky wants a piece of it, Mr. Hahn, so you two work out sharing arrangements, will you?
He's had a couple turns, so I'll go first.
All right.
I'll save him some time. And Mr. Mayran, thank you so much for being here. I just want to repeat something you said, because it's my biggest concern, frankly, in all of this. And you said, I find it troubling that sometimes sweeping and vague allegations of irregularities being made public many months after the election and not supported by specific facts. In some cases, the complaints are made to the media without information being forwarded to Elections Canada. Such allegations cannot be verified and merely undermine the trust of Canadians. That's my biggest personal concern in all of this, is that this circus, and it's a circus, is undermining, notwithstanding the legitimacy of the processes that need to be followed to get to the bottom of it. Nobody argues with that. But this whole process, the circus aspect of this process, has served to do nothing but, unfortunately, degrade the trust of Canadians in their systems. And I've spent some time in Afghanistan, most recently in Haiti, and I agree with you, our system is a model. So I guess one question first, and then another one if I have time. Do you know of elections, previous Canadian elections, where we've had such a spate of late complaints coming, so many months after an election?
I'm not personally aware of that. No, we would have to do research to.
Okay. Do either of your colleagues have any knowledge of that?
No.
Okay.
And they have a lot of experience.
I mean, I've only been involved in 4 elections, some here many more, but this is the first time that I can recall.
We would have to go way back in
we've
time.
had that. And a question sort of looking forward, because technology is a two-edged sword. Technology is great, but if it's used for wrongful purposes by the wrong people, obviously it can undermine the process. What would be your quick view on things like, people suggesting we should go to online voting, things like, those kind of technological, I won't call them advances, I'll call them changes. What would be your view of the risk-reward of some of those things?
That's something I wish, I've indicated repeatedly, that I wish to bring back to this committee over probably the next 2 years, so that we can agree or not to pursue a pilot project in terms of online voting. But there are risks associated with it. Whatever presentation I bring to this committee, the risk will be well identified, it will have been well assessed, and there will be measures to deal with them. It will be up to the committee to find whether it is satisfactory or not.
Because I'd be concerned about that, and this is not disparaging at all, but in the NDP leadership convention, there was some apparently manipulation of online voting, which would cause me concern if we applied that process to the larger election.
And without getting into that, I'm sure that the party will look. I will point out, I heard that, again, here in Canada, an increasing number of municipalities are running online voting. They've done it for now almost a decade, and with no major issues. And in fact, they are becoming models around the world again.
Okay.
Other countries are looking into.
Mr. Kiske?
1 minute.
Wow. Just trying to get in my mind what constitutes an election offense, because with my example earlier about what happened in Guelph with Mr. Valeriot and the misleading phone calls that coming out of his campaign, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong because I don't want to put words in your mouth, you said that if it could be determined that those phone calls constituted advertising, it could be in violation of the Elections Act, correct?
They did not carry the proper tagline,
Which we know
or if
didn't.
the expenses for them were not properly accounted for.
Okay, what if it was not determined that that was advertising? Would that mean that those type of phone calls would be acceptable?
I think that's an issue we have with the legislation. Yes, if it's not advertising, there's nothing in the legislation that governs telemarketing, per se.
And the determination of whether it is advertising or not is yours?
In this case specifically, it will be to the commissioner and the courts eventually if charges are laid.
So, but
I know your friend helped you with a little bit of time. Mr. Christopherson for 4.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, just in response to Mr. Hahn, I would just say that he's concerned about the circus effect of this, and I would just say to him that when he also mentioned that Canada's a role model for elections, it's because when there's any hint of anything untoward, Canadians do react the way they do, and they do create a political circus to ensure that it gets looked at. That's why we're a model, I would say to him, with great respect. Mr. Miron, may I ask you to characterize, if you can, how serious you would take a proof, if there were proof, that an organized effort to misrepresent themselves as Elections Canada during the election did happen. How serious would you take that? How serious an attack, if you will, on our democracy is that? Or is it really not a big deal? We ought not really get upset about it.
I think it's absolutely outrageous. Whether it was organized or bigger or whatever, the fact that, again, electors, at least that we know in Guelph, were misdirected by calls falsely made on behalf of Elections Canada is absolutely outrageous. Should not be tolerated. It should be sanctioned severely. And we need to look at the legislation to see whether we have the right framework there. But again, that's totally unacceptable in a modern democracy.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you saying that because it sets the standard by which Canadians expect our election process to meet. And so thank you for that. One question then, also last question. You mentioned that, if I'm paraphrasing you correctly, that there are complaints from all across Canada. Can we interpret that to mean that there are investigations then in virtually all the provinces across the country?
I will not comment on that. That's what the Commissioner. I've said as much as I could say on these matters.
I respect that, sir, and I hope you can appreciate it's our job to push you up to the line as much as we can. My last comments, Chair, would be a motion, and I would move that Mr. Mayron be invited back and scheduled to appear before this committee again before the House rises in June, just to give us an update on what's going on.
Sure. I would ask Mr. Mailon, would he be happy to do that? I know what the answer is, I think. But
of course.
Yes. Consider that an order of the committee then, Chair?
Well, it's a motion. I'm certain we know what happens with motions. They get voted on. So, yes?
Yeah, the government has absolutely no problem with that.
Great. Mr. Garneau, to make it unanimous among parties?
Happy to second it.
Then I think we need no motion. Monsieur Mailon, you and I will have to discuss, and the committee will ask you back before we rise for the summer, and you can give us another update as to where we've gone there. I think that's.
I was hoping to extend an invitation to visit our office to discuss other matters, but in June.
I think they would rather have you here.
Yes, I understand.
Mr. Reid?
We passed the motion, I'm assuming.
On unanimous consent?
Okay,
Yeah,
all
sure.
right. Good. So I'm not talking to that. I wanted to ask some additional questions. But
Mr. Reid, we have finished our list, and if I give you a question, I'll need to give more. I know he hasn't had one in that, and nor is Madame Latendresse, but we have gone through the full normal scope. I'm at the will of the committee. We're not at our time yet. I'll certainly entertain Mr. Reid for 4 minutes, and then we'll find a way of getting one for each party. So go ahead, Mr. Reid.
all right. Thank you. That's ideal, actually. Yeah, I think part of what has been going on here is we're asking ourselves, is what we've heard an indication of some kind of alligator under the bed? Is there something bigger going on or not? And the assertion has been, at least implied, that that there's widespread fraudulent either voter suppression or impersonation of Elections Canada or something of that sort. But what strikes me is that if there's really an alligator under the bed, I wonder if the alligator under the bed simply isn't a widespread problem with trying to figure out where people actually live in order to contact them in a way that, and you can see there's a distinct problem here. The normal voters list, from the normal number of voters who are put in the wrong location, is 16%. You indicated that after you go through and issue the final voters list, it comes down, I think you said, to a 12% error rate. Is that correct?
Or so. Yeah.
Or so. So that's still millions of Canadians. And I know from experience, I picked up that final voters list myself in the last election for my riding. First, I had to drive across the riding. It's a 2-hour drive in each direction. It took all day. But on top of that, it was about 48 hours or 72 hours before voting day. So you can understand it's hard to get that data, input it, and all that sort of thing. Any kind of actual, in our case, we do more print communication. You can't get that out with the list. And as a final note, this is not something that Elections Canada has done, but I'll make the point. From the last provincial election, Elections Ontario, put myself and my wife, we live in the same house, in 2 different ridings. So things like this occur all the time. It is, as a practical matter, very difficult to overcome that problem. I think there is a widespread problem here that leads to many of the kinds of complaints you've heard people saying, I was asked to vote in riding X, I don't live there, can be explained by this kind of ongoing databasing problem that we all have as a joint problem.
The list is not perfect, and I don't know that it will ever be, because the minute you produce it, it's already outdated, people move all the time, and all sorts of things happen. That being said, I still can reconcile the idea that people pretending to be Elections Canada try to misdirect people.
There's no doubt about that is, well, put simply, it's illegal. But I think I'm right in saying that the number of instances you're going to find of that as a proportion of the total number of complaints people are raising will be very, very small.
And again, that's why one of my key messages today is that we need to let the investigation unfold. We shouldn't draw conclusions. There may be all sorts of reasons for certain of the things that have been alleged, and that's the responsibility of the commissioner to determine what exactly happened, whether it was deliberate or unfortunate error. That's the job of the commissioner. And in due course, he will complete his investigation, and I will be happy to report to the committee on the outcomes.
Thank you.
That's it.
Your time. Mr. Carnot?
Thank you very much.
I'll go that way.
Mr. Mayor, can you tell us whether there are any other call centers other than RAC 9, which we've heard a lot about, that are mentioned in any of the 800 complaints?
No, that's part of the investigation. That's a matter with the commissioner. I will not comment on any specifics, and especially not names.
Can you tell us, there was I believe Elections Canada looked into the claim in Saanich Gulf Islands in 2008 where there was allegation of NDP calls that were made that affected the outcome there. Can you tell us what the final ruling or report was from Elections Canada on that particular matter?
Yes, and again, the plaintiff in that case did receive the ruling or the finding of the commissioner that basically determined that there was not able to gather enough evidence to support the allegations that were made at the time.
Okay, so the allegations of falsely claiming to be the NDP were not, you didn't have enough...
We couldn't find the evidence to support, again, the allegations.
And my final question is there appears to be a bit of a disconnect. You told me that people can proceed with a court challenge and they can go ahead. But in some cases, obviously the information that the Elections Commissioner may be collecting over the course of the next year might be instrumental in the judge's ruling, but that judge will not necessarily have that information. Do you automatically sort of feed into the, if you know that a court challenge is being issued and you come up with something, do you feed that information to the judge so that it may assist him or her in their
Again, as amicus curiae, we will provide the information that the court would find useful, that information that we can gather, that the court would find useful in its hearing of the matter. I shouldn't speculate at this point of time. I don't know if the court will be asking for information that are in the investigation, and I don't know how the court will manage that.
So the way it's done is that the court, in looking at it, will sort of automatically call Elections Canada and say, do you have any light to shed on this?
We've been served by the proceeding, but it's mainly driven by the applicants. The applicants will have to set what is the evidence to support their proceedings, and they will determine what they need in terms of information and witnesses. Again, it's a traditional court process. They will serve subpoena and ask witnesses to bring information with them.
Thank you. Madame Latendresse.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur Méran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Méran, I'd like us to come back to the motion that Mr. Christopher made earlier in the House this month. I think you're aware of the motion. At least I assume you are. It's divided in 3 parts. The first part asks that the necessary documents, or that the documents that parties have could be presented to Elections Canada. Another portion says that the telecom companies that are in direct contact with electors be registered, or be required to be registered with Elections Canada, and that those telecom companies who do such business be validated and verified. And can you think of any other things that should be changed, the legislation rather, to improve the situation? Well, as I said earlier, I plan to produce a report over the next year, including on issues related to the so-called robocalls, or phony calls that were made during the elections. There are elements in that motion and the resolution that merit attention. There are other elements that I would perhaps like to add or clarify at the right moment. So could that help to prevent future? Well, we'll see. Let's wait to see what the bill is. We'll see how it's drafted, and I'm certain that I will have comments to make at that time. So, but there are all kinds of things. We can see in what's already public knowledge, there are all kinds of fake names and pseudonyms, there are fake phone numbers, all kinds of things are being hidden here and camouflaged, and that goes against our entire electoral system, which is founded on transparency. So we'll have to reflect upon all of these issues and see how we can frame it better, whether that be in the Electoral Act or through some other means. And can you think of any other acts that could be amended to integrate that? Well, we're thinking about all of that, and we'll see. And if we are consulted by the government, we will surely have some proposals to make. And if not, I'm sure we'll be back before the committee, and perhaps we can make suggestions at that time. Thank you.
Brings us to the end of that round of questioning. We are still before our time. Will of the committee, further questions, or shall we adjourn for the day? I'm seeing nods, but I've asked 2 questions, so I should do it. Are we finished? No? Okay, we'll do a round of one-offs, about 2 minutes long, and we'll be finished. Joe, if you'd like to, Mr. Carmartin, if you'd like to go first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Méran, you've obviously made continuous reference to the Commissioner. Do you get any update, and I'm looking in terms of you coming back before the summer break, do you get updates from the Commissioner as to the status of the investigation? Is there that type of relationship between his office and yours?
The Commissioner and myself are maintaining what I would describe as an arm's length relationship. He will give me general information about the workload, the type of investigation they're carrying, but at a very general level, the type of resources required. But I do not, and he does not, I do not ask, and he does not offer specific information about specific investigation and where they are at.
So you get your information from Mr. Maher and Mr. McGregor as much as I do, I'm assuming, as opposed to the Commissioner.
It's interesting because I get the ITOs only after they are filed in court.
Yeah. Would there not be information in those ITOs that would have been coming from your side of the office, some of the complaints that you've had?
Sure, but I don't know when the ITOs are prepared, when they are, when the order from the court is sought. I only find that out when there is a return on the ITOs.
Along the same lines, in terms of relationships, are you aware of any police agency that has been called in to investigate, in addition to the work that the Commissioner is doing?
Well, the Commissioners has an MOU with the RCMP, so we can draw on their expertise, assistance as needed. If you're thinking in terms of provincial or municipal, I'm not aware of any investigation by those other bodies.
Mr. Garneau, quick one off.
Monsieur Méran.
Mr. Méran? Does the Commissioner, who's making his analyses, able to determine whether or not there would be any criminal prosecutions following those analyses if he were to find someone culpable? Do you mean over and above the infractions to the Canada Elections Act? Yes, if that were to lead to criminal charges, yes, it has happened in the past. And then is it up to the Commissioner to decide that? Yes, the Commissioner would determine that. If this were to lead to criminal charges, yes. If there were infractions to the Canada Elections Act, as well as, or if there were other infractions, especially of the criminal code, then he certainly would proceed and determine that. You were kind enough to mention that there were about 200 ridings and about 250 files opened. So would it be possible for the committee to receive more details, something a little more granular, so to speak, as to the investigations that are taking place? According to the complaints, and the complaints perhaps that they were based on in each case, without getting into the details of the complaints, would you be able to provide the committee with more information? Well, once again, generally speaking, we do not provide specific information about investigations. There's the presumption of innocence, and also we need to ensure the quality of the investigation. But over the next few months, I may be able to provide you with some additional information with respect to the workload and the way the Commissioner's office is organized, if that is of any interest to the committee members.
Off 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Just to kind of tie things up here, Mr. Mayor, again, thank you for your appearance. You've indicated that in the 308 election results, you stand behind your determination of the of each and every riding. That's part of your report that you've already made to this committee. I thank you for that. You've indicated in your report that you find it troubling to hear sometimes that sweeping and vague allegations of irregularities being made public many months after the election and not supported by specific facts. We find that troubling as well. We've referred to that as the unsubstantiated smear campaign. And I'd also like to point out that we've got a couple of former very significant, police chief and a commissioner of the OPP that have been involved in some very significant investigations. And one of the things that they're concerned with are some of the leaks. And I really want to say that I appreciate your commitment and your comments specifically with respect to keeping these things in the strictest confidence. I can tell you that there's been harm. There's been harm to individuals. There's been harm to companies, even though, for example, a member from Winnipeg Centre has apologized for a number of the outlandish things that he said in the NDP. There has been real harm done. Can you just confirm to the committee that you're going to work to make sure that no leaks are occurring from Elections Canada? Because there's a number of folks in the media that have, in fact, came forward and indicated to me that they feel Elections Canada has been the source of some of these things, or folks within Elections Canada. Can you just confirm that you're going to echo your comments to this committee that things will be kept in the strictest
Another
confidence?
case of vague allegation here. I can assure you, no, but seriously, it's, again, there's no source leaking from Elections Canada, if that's the allegation. I can attest to that. I think some should be checking their sources. There was an allegation in the media yesterday that a certain call was scheduled to be placed at midnight. We don't have that information, so it's certainly not coming from Elections Canada. Okay?
Thank you very much for that, and again, appreciate your commitment to that, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Del Mastro. That finishes our rounds today. Mr. Christophers, did you say you had something? Or?
I said I had a point of order.
Okay, point of order for Mr.
My point of order is actually by way of a question to you. Is it in order for this committee to request the Commissioner of Elections to appear before us?
Will of the committee. We've had the Commissioner of Elections before us before. Will of the committee to do so, I suppose.
Well, it just seems to me a lot of the questions Mr. Mayron had to refer back to the Commissioner, and if we're interested in getting whatever we can that is available in the public domain, it would make sense to invite the Commissioner to come in and have a discussion with us, too.
Mr. Reid, on that point,
No, it's not. I think the point of order, he asked if it's in order, and in my opinion, it is in order. You're going to rule that.
It is in order. So on the point of order, it is in order that we do invite him. I would refer the committee to its scheduling committee to, if that's something they wanted to do, the committee on agenda could certainly look into that happening.
Would you not accept the motion right now, Chair, as being in order, that we invite the Commissioner to come in and leave it to the steering committee to schedule the timing?
Yeah.
Mr. Reid, on that one?
I was actually going to basically make the same motion. So,
okay. So
I guess that means I
do see nods that you're seconding, and we're okay to do that, and we set that up. The chair will speak with the scheduling committee and make that happen.
Very good. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, colleagues.
Anything else for the good of the committee today? Then we are adjourned. Thank you, Mr. Mayron.